Barbie was easily one of the best movies of 2023. This Greta Gerwig directed movie where Margot Robbie plays the personification of a literal Barbie girl living in a literal Barbie world is fun, heartfelt because we are Canuck, beautifully shot, often hilarious, and most importantly, very rich in meaning. In fact, that last one about the film's deep thematic purpose is especially notable, mostly because Barbie has an unsubtle narrative message that cannot be misconstrued with any other alternative meanings. If anything, the film has a clear thematic through line that's crafted with a lot of care and nuance that can't be confused with any other misinterpretation, because truly, Barbie's thematic statement is blunt, unlike political campaigns or the kind of Midwestern tendency to sort of avoid making absolute statements. Maybe. Barbie just has a clear sense of narrative vision, and one that loudly details that said vision to the audience. Because when it comes to Barbie, we the viewer just know what the movie is all about here. And that's very much unlike many mainstream Hollywood blockbusters, which generally have a paradoxical dichotomy. In fact, many blockbuster movies are simultaneously blunt in their thematic messaging as to what real-world issues and types of people their conflicts and antagonists stand for, all while still being opaque and lacking in specific details that cause those said conflicts and antagonists to not be total one-to-one portrayals of the real-world issues and types of people that they are supposed to represent. And yes, I know that sounds confusing, but hear me out on this long-as tangent that I promise is really important to this video essay, I swear. And to explain this, I'm going to use the Empire and the First Order in Star Wars and Thanos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as examples. See, as pointed out by essayists like Lindsay, Ellis, and Mira, links in the description, entities like the Empire and the First Order in the Star Wars movies and Thanos in the Marvel's movies have parallels with real-world problems and issues. After all, in terms of Star Wars, the Empire and the First Order are supposed to represent fascism and dictatorships, mostly because the costuming, performances, and the camera framing of the Imperial and First Order forces make the audience go, hey, these are space Nazis. And in terms of Thanos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he is a maniac that uses the fear of overpopulation as the justification of genocide, which represents real-world maniacs who view overpopulation as a justification for eugenics and such, because obviously, the messaging was just really f***ing blunt here. And for that, whether we are discussing Star Wars or the MCU, these stories give us clear conflicts and parallels with real-world issues and such. But here is the thing, those otherwise clear statements, characterizations, and such often aren't handled with nuance and or obfuscate or avoid certain characteristics and details of the real-world things that they are supposed to represent. Because while yes, the Empire and the First Order are supposed to represent a fascist entity, and Thanos is supposed to be the personification of someone going to genocidal extremist lengths to solve overpopulation, these portrayals are lacking in certain areas. In terms of the First Order and the Empire being fascist in Star Wars, and I'm just going by the text of the movies and Disney Plus shows here, extended universe stuff might be different. The Empire and the First Order, unlike real-life fascist entities, often don't target specific races and demonize them in order to drum up popular support for their authoritarian tendencies and policies. If anything, rather than having major displays of bigotry, they are just fascists that want power and control, all for the sake of wanting power and control. And sure, some might argue that the Purge of the Jedi at the end of the prequel trilogy might represent a time that the Empire targeted another class of people, and an entire religious entity at that, and given that Jedi-oriented story set between the end of the prequel trilogy and the beginning of the original trilogy, where Jedi are often represented akin to Jewish folks fleeing and hiding from the Nazis, there is a certain validity to this viewpoint, but it's important to note that the Jedi weren't targeted and vilified due to their religion or who they were. No, instead, the Empire targeted them because they were a powerful organization that had political capital in the current government who were essentially very capable space cops, and the Empire needed them to be eliminated in order for Emperor Palpatine's coup and overthrow of the Republic to work. If anything, the butchering of the Jedi wasn't about bigotry, it was about eliminating an opposition force so that the Empire could control the government. That's it, meaning that the Empire, as well as the First Order, was just about having power without democratic checks and balances, all while sidestepping the fact that real-life fascist movements coincide with discrimination and bigotry against minority classes, which unlike the Jedi and Star Wars, generally have very little control in government or powerful stations of the nation, and are just targeted just for the sake of being the other, meaning that fascism in Star Wars just doesn't 100% reflect fascism in reality. Now let's discuss the other example, i.e. the one that resides within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. See, in terms of Thanos may technically represent an extreme genocidal version of of real-life people who believe that overpopulation is an existential threat, yet this said portrayal lacks nuance and necessary details that would otherwise make it an accurate reflection of someone agonizing over the issue of overpopulation. For one thing, as Mira Singer pointed out in her essay on the matter, the superheroes and protagonist in Avengers Infinity War take Thanos' claim that the universe is overpopulated and thus needs a severe culling at face value. If anything, they never challenge him on this, or at the very least, they never try to argue that there could be an alternative solution to that of murdering half the universe with a snap of Thanos' fingers, like a flick of the balls. If anything, Captain America, Iron Man, and the rest just fight Thanos due to the fact that killing people is bad, because obviously. And while yes, murder bad is a good enough reason to root for heroes to overcome the machinations of an antagonist in a comic book movie like this, Avengers Infinity War unfortunately still uses a surface level understanding of overpopulation that is lacking in specific details. And that's honestly not very reflective of reality, where there are actual flaws in the overpopulation argument. In fact, one thing pro-overpopulation control people argue is that overpopulation is causing people to go hungry, which hell, that's even something that Thanos even argues a few times in Infinity War. But in real life, there is a major fault in this belief in that there actually is enough food to feed everyone and end world hunger. It's just that capitalism means to distribute, and a lack of empathy have overall prevented us from actually delivering a resolution to this solvable problem, because honestly, population control just is not needed here, and these counterpoints and potential alternatives were not presented in Thanos' crusade against overpopulation in Avengers Infinity War, because as stated before, the heroes just take Thanos' claims at face value and never challenge him on his bullshit. Additionally, and let's be really clear on this, overpopulation fears and conspiracies in real life are often associated and have connotations with racism, eugenics, xenophobia, and white supremacy. While sure, some people might not associate themselves with those awful things, the fact of the matter is that, in America and other Western countries, people don't refer to the threat of overpopulation in places we live in, save for fears of immigrants, which hey, there's that xenophobia I was talking about. But still, aside from those instances, overpopulation control proponents, when they discuss their beliefs that overpopulation is a problem, often refer to countries and continents that are far away from the Western countries that they reside in, where the majority race is not whiter than Tony Montana plastered in cocaine, meaning that if pro-overpopulation control folks in real life were to ever have the power that Thanos had at the end of Infinity War and plotted to eliminate half the world, they'd probably genocide people who look very different from them, because racism and shit. And that's honestly just a reality that isn't reflected by Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, mostly because Thanos doesn't target a specific race of people in his genocide. Instead, he goes after everyone equally, because when it comes to murdering half the universe, Thanos doesn't discriminate. He just isn't a chonky purple man supremacist, because Thanos, you swell motherfucker. How kind of you. And for that reason, Thanos is just a sanitized version of eco-fascist and overpopulation beliefs. Now, whether we are discussing how in Star Wars the Empire and the First Order aren't a 100% accurate mirrors of real-world fascism, and how in the MCU Thanos isn't a one-to-one portrayal of extremist overpopulation beliefs, it is important to note that these movies are still good. I still like Avengers Infinity War, and I still really enjoy Star Wars, mostly because I do consider myself media literate and can read between the lines of what's accurate and what's missing nuance, and still come to the same conclusion that, in the case of Star Wars and the MCU, that fascism and overpopulation paranoia are bad because obviously. And while sure, in most cases, being more accurate portrayals of real-life social and political issues can make for a better cinematic or storytelling experience, more on that soon, the fact of the matter is that movies like Avengers Infinity War and many of the Star Wars movies work for other reasons. They are still good. Yet with that being said, a lot of people are not media literate, meaning that when it comes to things like fascism in Star Wars and overpopulation in Avengers Infinity War, the lack of being an explicit one-to-one comparison between fiction and reality can cause a degree of separation for viewers that need things absolutely spelled the out for them. After all, this is why some Star Wars fans view the original trilogy as apolitical, even though it is on all accounts very political, given that it's about a rebellion overthrowing an oppressive fascist entity. And it's also why how some MCU fans argue that Thanos' genocide was morally righteous, that Thanos was right or whatever. And due to these types of misunderstandings, at best, in regards to what fiction is actually about, it's always better for a movie, TV show, game, or book to take a firm and detailed stand stand when portraying fictional events, beings, and political factions that are inspired by real life. If anything, it's something that would allow a given work to make a bold statement on its topic of choice. This brings us back to Barbie, because, long tangent aside, this is the topic of today's video. See, Barbie is one of those movies that makes a bold statement, where something like Star Wars and Avengers don't fully commit to portraying the nuances of the topics they aim to represent. Barbie goes all in on its messaging, with that said messaging being a feminist one, something that we can see from the story, characters, and visual style alone. For just a few examples, Barbie is from a bright female-dominated world where women hold the power. It confronts the ugly truths about how Barbie as a toy, a plastic doll marketed as a promise to young girls, showcasing how they can be anything they want and dream to be, doesn't reflect reality that women are all too often a second-class citizen in our society, meaning that as a toy, Barbie sells an unrealistic dream to girls where they could potentially be president or the CEO of a company, though for me, I would have loved to have a stoner metal Barbie, because come on Mattel, get your shit together. Then there's the fact that Barbie discovers that the real world is an inverse male-dominated version of her world. The movie remarks on how women are held to an impossible standard in life, beauty, and other social roles. See the iconic speech from America Ferrera in this movie, and then there are just many other aspects of the movie that champion feminist themes. And while sure, Barbie is based on a plastic toy, meaning that Barbie as a movie, even with all of its emotionally resonant storytelling, is still in service to capitalism, and for the fact that I don't really recall if the movie uses the F word being feminism, Barbie is unmistakably a feminist movie to its core, because unlike the earlier examples of Star Wars and Thanos, this movie fully commits to its message and does so with visuals that pop, a witty sense of humor, and a heartfelt narrative that many women can relate to. It's terrific and just doesn't go halfway on its themes. And this is all even before the fact that the Barbie movie labels the thematic antagonists of the film numerous times, that antagonist being the patriarchy, i.e. the male-dominated world that is essentially the real world, the one that relegates women and their dreams and goals as being secondary to men's, the one where the vast majority of government officials are male, the one where most CEOs and money holders are dude bros, the one where many occupational fields are male-dominated, and so on and so forth, because the patriarchy. And Barbie essentially labels the patriarchy as the de facto villain, like a Sauron that disrespects women. And that's powerful both because it's yet another example of how the Barbie movie fully, completely, and unapologetically commits to its thematic storytelling, and in how it's relatable to an America after Roe v. Wade has been overturned, and by extension the rise of Christian right-wing fascism in Western countries meant to restrict the rights of women and others, which ultimately allows the Barbie movie's feminist themes to just hit a bullseye. No relation. Admittedly, Barbie cinematically representing feminist ideals has caused a little bit of a backlash to the film, which does make a little bit of sense. After all, when a movie makes a blunt and uncompromising political statement about anything, there are going to be opposing views on that said film, even though those said opposing views in Barbie's case are generally kind of shit. Not always, because, there are fair critiques in any movie, even with politics that I like, but in general, yes. A lot of the backlash against the Barbie movie is a bunch of crying men who claim that the movie hates men. It really doesn't, but I'll get into that in a separate video, who are very insecure in their masculinity, because incels, who the f needs them. And for that, the Barbie movie takes a stand on an issue, which is very interesting because unlike politically vague films where meanings can easily be misinterpreted, you really can't misread Barbie for anything other than what it really is, which is a feminist movie that points out how real-world women are second-class citizens compared to men, which even in how much our world has culturally advanced in some ways, though that's also ignoring the fact that it has regressed in other ways, is still the case. And seeing as the Barbie movie portrays this inequality, this film upsets people who enjoy the status quo, the men and some women who want to uphold the unjust patriarchy. And for that, both feminist and anti-female equal rights folks know what the Barbie movie is and what it stands for. It's a movie that showcases the misogynistic and patriarchal injustices of the real world by contrasting it with a matriarchal counter-reality, one where women dominate every socio-political power structure around, a fact that's humorous, and then the movie gets really blunt about its overall message, because, the real world is an inverse reverse to Barbie's fictitious reality. It has the same out-of-sync gender dynamics, but in reverse. And yes, Barbie's matriarchal world is charming, but the only reason it works like this is because it is a fantasy that contracts with the out-of-balance gender dynamics of the real world. And while sure, maybe there's some criticism to where Barbie world should reckon with the need for gender equality, just like the real world should, the point of Barbie Land is to represent a satirical upside-down version of the real world. A dreamland where women aren't secondary citizens to men, where women can fulfill their dreams so that we can be whoever we want to be, even if that means eating cheese cubes in the shower while sobbing uncontrollably, because that's who I am, damn it. And for that, Barbie as a film represents female empowerment to its core. Unlike many movies, it's a film with a strong thesis statement, and a feminist one at that, meaning that Barbie truly is bold.